At 30,000 feet above Colorado's eastern plains, the sky was empty, but for one solitary blip moving west at a steady pace. From the NORAD watch floor, that blip had triggered a quiet alert 30 seconds earlier, unregistered, no transponder response. And now, inside, restricted airspace. 5 minutes later, Viper flight out of Peterson Air Force Base was climbing fast. 3 F-22 Raptors locked into diamond formation with vectors straight toward the anomaly. Got eyes on the target, came the voice of First Lt. Jake Morrison, call sign Viper 1. His helmet's HUD showed the aircraft now clearly a civilian L-39 Albatross, an old Czech-built jet trainer, restored and gleaming under the morning sun. Well, that's quaint, he said over the squadron comms. Weekend warrior decided to LARP Top Gun. Again. His wingman, Viper 2, chuckled. Think she's got a GoPro in there or just dreams of airshow glory. Morrison's tone carried more amusement than concern. They'd done this a dozen times before. Intercept, hail, redirect. Sometimes you got a cranky doctor in a Cessna. Sometimes a guy with more money than sense trying to ride old warbirds through unauthorized skies. This one looked no different. From his altitude, he could already see the curvature of the earth. Thin clouds drifted under the Raptors like slow rivers. Ahead, the L-39 kept cruising, not changing course or speed, not reacting to their radar pings. It was just flying steady and slow, like it had every right to be there. Viper 3 broke the silence. Kinda bold flying that close to Buckley's no-fly zone. Either she's lost, or she thinks she's untouchable. Either way, Morrison replied, we'll sort her out in the next 5 minutes. Lock on passive. Don't scare her yet. All 3 Raptors adjusted their speed and drifted closer into standard intercept posture. Viper 2 peeled left, taking the high arc. Morrison slid in low and starboard. Their radar painted the target clean. No response. No squawk, no maneuvering, just quiet, controlled flight. Control, this is Viper 1. Visual contact confirmed. Single L-39 jet. Gray-blue livery. Unarmed profile. No visible external pods or munitions. Civilian markings worn but present. Pilot unresponsive. Back at NORAD. The response came without hesitation. Viper flight. You are authorized to initiate radio contact and proceed with redirect protocols. Escalate to enforcement posture if necessary. Morrison toggled his comm to the civilian emergency frequency. Unidentified aircraft. This is Viper 1 of the United States Air Force. You are operating in restricted airspace. Respond immediately and prepare to follow vector instructions. No reply. He tried again, this time with less protocol, more pressure. Ma'am or sir, whatever fantasy flight you're on, it's over. Acknowledge and comply or we bring you down. Inside his cockpit, the targeting brackets blinked, confirming lock. He didn't arm anything. This wasn't that kind of mission. But posture mattered. You had to look serious, even when the odds were laughable. His finger hovered near the switch, his eyes narrowed. Still nothing. Grandma must have taken a nap, he muttered. Viper 2 cracked up. She probably doesn't even know we're here. Viper 3 adjusted formation. She's flying like a textbook. Level. Smooth. Disciplined. You think it's autopilot. No way, Morrison said. That's hand-flown. And clean. Whoever's in there knows what they're doing. So what retired airline pilot going through a midlife return-to-glory moment or someone with too much money and too few rules? They were close now. 400 yards. Through his canopy, Morrison could make out the profile of the jet's canopy and a single figure inside. Helmeted. Unfazed. Still no radio response. All right, he said. Let's raise the heat. He switched back to the frequency. This is your final warning. You have entered military airspace. You are in violation of federal flight restrictions. Comply or be escorted with force. The others began preparing to close the gap further. No one was panicked. This was procedure. Intercept. Command. Comply. or consequences. That was the doctrine. But the longer the L-39 stayed silent, the more Morrison's instincts prickled. Something about the way it moved, perfect trim, unflinching heading, not a trace of panic or hesitation. He narrowed his eyes again. Who are you?" he muttered to himself. The answer hadn't arrived yet, but it was coming, and it would make the sky fall silent. At 30,000 feet, with the Rockies fading behind her and the vast sky stretching in every direction, Lena Harper kept one hand resting gently on the throttle. Her other hand held steady on the control stick of her L-39 Albatross, a two-seat trainer she'd stripped down and rebuilt herself over 2 long winters in a hangar outside Durango. She flew it now not for show or speed, but because it gave her the one thing that still made sense: quiet. The panel lights blinked in soft intervals. Engine hum, air passing over the canopy, the muted static of her headset. These were the only sounds. She kept the comm line open but didn't transmit. There was no one to talk to. That was the point. The flight plan today was simple. Test the new navigation suite, run a clean altitude hold at cruise, stretch her jet's legs across 200 miles of uninterrupted sky. No schedule, no destination, just sky. Lena had logged more than 2,000 hours in the A-10 Thunderbolt II during her active years. She'd flown close air support in terrain so tight it left no room for second chances. She had held formation under fire, had watched tracer rounds rip past her canopy like fireflies. Now, she flew a trainer-class jet that would never again see combat. But in the cockpit, the feeling hadn't changed. The switch flipped. The world outside disappeared. She looked to her left, watching the light play across the leading edge of the wing. A speck of dust on the glass caught her eye and she wiped it away with her glove. A small but practiced movement. Old habits never left. They just waited for altitude. Her hair was tied back beneath the helmet, tucked tight under the edge of her flight cap. The helmet wasn't standard civilian gear. It was a retired Air Force issue model, painted flat gray, customized with an old call sign patch worn thin over time. She'd kept it when she left the service, not as a souvenir, but because it still fit, and she still flew like someone who needed it. 10 years had passed since her last official mission. 10 years since she signed the non-disclosure forms, handed over the briefings, and disappeared from any roster that mattered. The operation hadn't made headlines. That was the point. Some things were better left classified, tucked into black binders and kept away from public curiosity. But the mission had stayed with her. Not in nightmares, just in detail. The exact turn radius she'd used to bait the enemy radar. The coordinates where she'd ejected chaff and broken lock. The moment she knew her wingman wouldn't make it back, and she flew on anyway. Not because it was brave, but because there was no one else to finish the job. Now, when people saw her at airfields, they assumed she was a tech or a mechanic. Sometimes they asked if the plane belonged to her husband. She never corrected them. She didn't owe anyone that much. She pulled a sip from her hydration pack, exhaled softly, and checked the gauges again. Everything in the green. Outside. A contrail drifted high above. Another commercial flight passing far overhead. Headed for cities that meant nothing to her anymore. There had been offers. After she got out. Contractors. Think tanks. Defense consulting gigs that promised money and vague prestige. She turned them all down. She didn't want a podium. She wanted the sky. Sometimes, a younger pilot would recognize her name. A few had asked to train with her. She declined every time. If they wanted to learn something, they'd have to learn the same way she did in the air, with nothing between them and failure but instinct and discipline. She didn't think of herself as bitter. She'd made peace with the silence that came after service. The medals were in a box somewhere. The uniforms didn't fit anymore. What mattered now was altitude, airspeed, direction, and the steady sense of control. The cockpit had always been the only place where everything made sense. No politics, no miscommunications, no guessing someone's intent. You either flew the mission, or you didn't. You either lived through it, or you didn't. She switched off the panel music, a jazz loop she played sometimes, and let the sound of the engine fill the space. The aircraft moved smooth and level, responding like an extension of her thoughts. She wasn't racing anyone. She wasn't proving anything. This was what peace looked like: a worn-out helmet, a decommissioned jet, and a woman alone at 30,000 feet, chasing nothing but quiet. The first pulse of the threat alert blinked amber on Lena's lower display. A second later, it turned red. She didn't flinch. Her hand moved to silence the tone while her eyes swept across the radar return. The system had tagged 3 fast-moving signatures. Northeast vector, closing at high subsonic speeds. The angles were tight, deliberate. This wasn't commercial traffic. She glanced at her nav display and cross-checked her position. The GPS said she was still following the corridor filed that morning, but the airspace boundary on the screen didn't match the NOTAM she'd reviewed pre-flight. There was a shelf of restricted airspace extending west, newly active, by the look of it, and her jet was flying straight through the edge of it. That update hadn't posted on the FAA terminal earlier. "Terrific," she muttered, adjusting course slightly to shallow out the incursion. Too late. The radar signals were already closing fast. Her panel confirmed IFF negative contacts, no transponder handshake, military aircraft, intercept behavior, no doubt about it. She reached for the comm toggle to hail ATC for confirmation, but then paused. The blips had shifted formation. 3 distinct trails now split into a shallow triangle, with one vectoring high right and the others tightening to bracket. Textbook maneuver. This wasn't just observation. This was control. Through the canopy, the contrails formed faint white lines in the sky. From this distance, she could make out the shape of the airframes, stealth geometry, Raptor-class engines, F-22s. Her old unit had trained on them. She'd once run mock drills against them in an A-10, dodging their lock-ons with terrain masking and unorthodox patterns, but this wasn't a training sortie. Her posture remained calm. She didn't make sudden changes or dial the frequency just yet. She let the moment settle, checked her own transponder status. Fully operational. Flight plan filed and logged. The error wasn't hers. It was bureaucratic. But that wouldn't stop the response team from treating it as a threat until proven otherwise. The lead aircraft dropped into her left peripheral. It held station at a distance of just under 500 feet, offset slightly lower. She could see the pilot's helmet inside the canopy, visor down, face unreadable. The jet held its place with absolute precision. No waver, no drift. She kept her hands steady. No dive. No climb. The L-39 wasn't armed. Even if it had been, this would be no contest. But posture was everything. She flew smooth and clear. No sudden moves. No panic. The second Raptor mirrored right, forming a flanking wedge. The third remained slightly behind and above, a control net invisible, but total. Any exit move she tried would be countered within seconds. She didn't plan to try. Her thumb hovered near the comm button. She waited. Let them make the first move. The alert tone pinged again. Radar lock confirmation. Not a threat yet, but the systems aboard the F-22s had acquired her signature and tagged it in their targeting HUDs. She exhaled once, let it out slowly, then looked forward again. They were here to make a point. Young pilots, most likely, following protocol, reading her old jet like it was some warbird flown by a weekend thrill seeker. She'd been in their position once. The thrill of power, of gear, of superiority. She knew the feeling. She also knew how fast it could turn. Today might be their turn to learn that. But not just yet. The first radio hail came in clean on the emergency frequency. The voice was clipped, formal, practiced. Unidentified aircraft. This is Viper 1 of the United States Air Force. You are in restricted airspace. Acknowledge and comply with immediate course correction. Lena didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the lead Raptor off her port wing. She recognized the maneuvering cues, the formation. These weren't green trainees. They were polished, current, sharp, but they were young. She could tell by the tone. After 10 seconds of silence, the voice returned, now with the edges softening into a smirk. "Ma'am, I'm sure this is all a big misunderstanding, but you're a bit out of your lane up here. Let's go ahead and start descending before this turns into something embarrassing." Lena let the voice hang in the air. She didn't touch the radio, didn't even twitch. Instead, she scanned her instruments again. Airspeed stable, altitude locked, fuel well within range. Everything was fine except their assumptions. Viper 2 joined in with dry amusement. "Think she picked that thing up from a museum hangar? I haven't seen an albatross fly this high since flight school." "Probably trying to relive her cadet days," Viper 3 added. "Or maybe she just watched too much Iron Eagle." Lena's jaw tensed, but only slightly. The words didn't land. They bounced. She'd heard worse in hangars filled with smoke and doubt. She'd walked into briefing rooms where no one made room for her. She'd flown combat missions in aircraft others called obsolete, while those same doubters stayed on the ground. Viper 1 tried again. "Civilian pilot, last call. You have 10 seconds to respond before we escort you to the nearest runway the hard way. Hope you're ready for a bumpy descent." The bracket indicators on her HUD showed their systems had locked her L-39 for tracking. Not a firing solution, not yet, but close. They wanted her nervous. She wasn't. Instead, Lena watched the symmetry of their flight paths. They flew by the book, textbook spacing, aggressive posturing. They'd been trained well, but they hadn't been tested. Not the way that left marks. She remembered flying into Kandahar's dust storms at night, engines choked by sand and ECM pulses jamming half her panel. She remembered doing CAS runs so low the A-10's gear almost touched rooftops. These kids had the best fighter jets in the world, but they hadn't earned the silence yet. Not the kind that follows real fear. "You think she even knows we're here?" Viper 2 laughed. Viper 3 chimed in again. "She's probably playing 80s rock in there and pretending she's in an action movie." Lena took a slow breath and looked out at the lead pilot again. She imagined the face behind the visor, the expression, the confidence. She knew that look. She'd worn it once, long before the call signs meant anything, before legends had weight. She placed her hand gently over the mic switch, not to speak yet, just to feel it. Let them have their moment. Let them think this was about to go how it always went. Because some lessons can't be taught in briefings. They arrive quiet, and they arrive late. And when they do, they don't ask permission. They just fall. Lena keyed her mic with quiet precision. The comm click sounded sharp in her headset. Her voice, when it came, was steady and unhurried. "Viper flight. This is Captain Harper. Call sign Falcon Ghost." The frequency went dead. No reply, no chatter, no jokes. Inside the cockpit of Viper 1, Morrison froze. His hand hovered just off the throttle, fingers twitching. His gaze snapped to the HUD. He replayed the name in his head. Once, then twice, as if trying to correct his own hearing. Viper 2's voice broke through on the internal squadron channel, barely above a whisper. Did she say, "Falcon Ghost"? No one answered. Viper 3 clicked in next. That's not possible. Falcon Ghost is a legend. That call sign's from. Morrison cut him off. She said Captain Harper, confirming it. His onboard system recorded everything. The name was real, spoken with the kind of calm that didn't bluff, not shaky, not defensive, just known. He didn't need a database. The name was written on the walls of every advanced flight school in the country, not in official doctrine, but in whispered stories between instructors. The pilot who held off 12 hostiles in a 30-year-old jet during Operation Midnight Lance. The one who pulled a full squadron out alive when air support failed and comms were gone. The one who disappeared into the black files after that mission and never resurfaced. Until now, Falcon Ghost isn't supposed to exist, Viper 2 said, his voice thin. She was Air Force, not Navy. Right, Viper 3 asked. She flew A-10s, didn't she? Morrison closed his eyes for a beat. The pieces dropped into place. The outdated jet, the discipline, the silence, the formation, the refusal to respond to threats. It hadn't been arrogance. It had been patience. Viper flight. Disengage immediately, came the squadron commander's voice over the master frequency. There was urgency behind it, not confusion, not concern. Respect. Repeat, all units disengage. Maintain formation. No lock-ons, no broadcast targeting. Give her space. Morrison's hands were still on the controls, but his posture had shifted. His back straightened. His tone changed. Copy. Viper 1. We're falling to escort spacing. No one questioned the order. The Raptors adjusted as one. From triangle control to escort spread. No more lock brackets on her HUD. No more radar pressure. Just silence and position. A flight of the most advanced fighters in the world now flanking an aging L-39 like it was leading a ceremonial flyover. Inside her cockpit, Lena remained quiet. She didn't gloat, didn't explain. She just flew, straight, level, as if this was how it had always been meant to go. Morrison watched her from his canopy, heart still hammering, the weight of recognition landing harder than any afterburner. He had called her grandma, had joked about museum jets and amateur pilots, but the woman ahead of him had rewritten the combat tactics his own instructors had used. Her decisions had shaped the doctrine he trained under. And now, she was here, alive, flying at cruise, still sharp. He clicked his comm again, this time to the private training channel. Viper flight. We just made history. Fly like you know it. There were no more jokes, only quiet sky, and a single name that carried more weight than a fleet. Falcon Ghost. The kind of call sign that didn't need explaining. The kind that made everyone else just stop. Without a single word exchanged, the formation shifted. The 3 F-22s eased back in unison, sliding into escort positions with practiced grace. No lock-ons remained, no tension in the spacing. They flew alongside the L-39 now not as enforcers, but as guardians. Inside Lena's cockpit, she noted the change without a flicker of emotion. She didn't need to look. She could feel the difference in the air, the way their jets moved less assertive, more reverent. It was the kind of maneuver no flight manual dictated. Just a quiet nod between professionals who knew they were in the presence of something rare. Over the shared frequency, control came back online. The voice had changed too. Falcon Ghost. This is Grey Rock Control. We apologize for the intercept. Flight plan update was delayed in the regional system. You are cleared to proceed on current heading. Full discretion. Lena gave no reply. She didn't need clearance. She was already flying. Then came something she hadn't expected. From the southern quadrant, 2 new radar returns appeared. She watched them close the distance fast. Sleek outlines resolved into 2 F-35 Lightning IIs, flanking from above, then descending into protective offset. One of the F-22 pilots keyed in, voice lower now. Looks like word spreading. A third contact joined moments later. This one approached slower, older airframe, no stealth signature. A Block 40 F-16 Fighting Falcon, its gray coat dulled with time but flying sharp as ever. Lena smiled faintly. That model hadn't flown escort in years. Whoever was in that seat had history. The F-16 pilot hailed on a quiet frequency. With respect, ma'am. Some of us have waited years for this moment. Permission to share your airspace. Lena paused, not out of doubt, out of memory. She gave the briefest answer. Keep up, then. They did. The sky was quiet, but full. 7 jets now moved across the altitude band like a ceremonial wave. No formations rehearsed, no fanfare, just position and presence. Lena remained at the center, not because she asked to be, because they put her there, from outside. The scene looked surreal. A vintage trainer surrounded by 5th-generation stealth fighters and one aging bird from a past generation, and yet there was no contradiction, no one out of place. This was not an escort of duty, it was one of respect, and not a single word needed to say why. Morrison toggled to the squadron's encrypted side channel. the one usually reserved for mid-air coordination drills. His voice came through softer this time. No edge. "Ma'am, Captain Harper, this is Lieutenant Morrison. I want to apologize for how we approached earlier." Lena didn't respond right away. The silence wasn't cold, just measured. Then she clicked back with a tone that was steady and clean. "Apology accepted. Lieutenant, we've all been young once." There was a pause. Then he tried again. "I need to ask. Operation Midnight Lance. Is it true what they say?" Lena's grip on the stick remained firm, her flight path unchanged. The L-39 held altitude without effort. Her answer came after a few seconds, not rushed. "Depends on what they say." Morrison exhaled once, quiet in his cockpit. "That you were outnumbered 12-1. That you faked a full squadron's presence on enemy radar. That you kept flying even after you were hit. That you saved everyone but didn't keep the credit." Lena's eyes didn't move from the horizon. Her voice was calm, not dismissive. "The details are still classified, Lieutenant, but the principle's simple. When you're outgunned, you don't fight their fight. You make them fight yours." Behind him, Viper 2 and 3 stayed silent, tuned into the same frequency. The F-35 pilots flanking them had fallen into step as well. No one spoke, but no one disengaged. Morrison kept his tone low. "The Phantom Squadron trick. You generated false radar pings, didn't you?" "Among other things," Lena replied. "Old techniques, smart use of terrain, controlled emissions, split pattern pulses, make a dozen targets look like more, make them think they're being herded." He nodded inside his helmet. It sounded theoretical in training manuals. It sounded suicidal when faced in reality. And that worked. It worked because I knew what they expected to see, and I gave them too much of it. You never win by being louder. You win by being harder to predict. Morrison felt his breath slow. The simplicity of the logic didn't match the weight of the execution. She hadn't outgunned anyone. She'd outthought them, outlasted them, turned fear into noise and then vanished into it. "I never thought anyone could actually pull that off," he admitted. "You wouldn't, at your age," Lena said, "but not unkindly, because you haven't been afraid enough yet. Fear teaches you faster than training ever will." The line stayed open, but quiet again. Everyone listening knew this wasn't a story. It was a warning dressed as wisdom. Lena keyed in once more. "Superiority isn't in the hardware. It's in knowing what to do when the hardware isn't enough. Your jet doesn't win the fight. Your judgment does." They flew like that for another 5 minutes. No orders, no adjustments, just listening. In that moment, Morrison understood. They weren't escorting her. They were learning from her. And they would remember every second. The classroom inside the advanced fighter training facility was silent except for the faint hum of the projector cooling fan. 50 students filled the rows, all in flight suits, all sitting straighter than usual. Morrison and his team sat near the front, eyes forward, no longer cocky, no longer certain. On the central display behind the podium was a still photo from a few days prior, a lone L-39 flanked by F-22s and F-35s at altitude. The image needed no caption. Lena Harper stood in front of them wearing a standard flight jacket. No rank insignia, no ribbons. She didn't look like a legend. That was the point. She waited a moment before she spoke, letting the room settle the way a good instructor knows how. "Who can tell me the difference between flying and combat flying?" she asked. One cadet raised a hand quickly. "Combat flying is applying your training under enemy fire." Lena nodded once. Partially true. But combat throws out the rule book. Training assumes the enemy will act rationally, that weather will behave, that your systems will respond the way the manual says. She took a few steps toward the whiteboard, drew a rough outline of overlapping radar cones. "This is what they teach you, what you expect to face. But real combat is messy. It happens at the edge of what you thought was possible." Another cadet, a young woman with her sleeves rolled neatly, raised a hand. "Ma'am, how do you know when to break protocol?" "You don't break rules," Lena answered. "You transcend them. There's a difference. Chaos kills. Improvisation keeps you alive. She gestured to a tactical diagram on the screen, a replay of her own radar pattern from Operation Midnight Lance, though stripped of identifiers. No one taught me this. I had to invent it, mid-air, because nothing in my syllabus covered what I faced that day. Morrison leaned slightly forward. He'd heard the story, or parts of it, whispered like myth in the hallways of his first flight detachment, but seeing the flight data now, hearing it from her, stripped the myth down to something harder, something real. Lena continued, 12 targets, no backup, low terrain, systems degraded, enemy comms unbroken. I made them think I was more than I was. That's the fight I gave them, not the one they came looking for. One of Morrison's wingmen raised his hand. Ma'am, were you afraid? Terrified, she said without hesitation, and that's how I knew I was still thinking clearly. Fear is data. It tells you what matters. Use it. Don't fight it. The room stayed quiet. No fidgeting. No glances at the clock. A trainee from the rear row stood without prompting. How do we earn a call sign like yours? Lena looked him over. He was maybe 23, flight tested, but not scarred yet. You don't earn it by trying, she said. You earn it by doing the right thing when no one's watching, when it would be easier to quit, when the sky doesn't care who you are. She let that hang for a moment, then shifted tone. Now, let's talk about target misdirection through EM scatter and decoy pulse sequencing. Who here has trained on false signature generation? Half the room raised their hands. Lena smiled slightly. Good. Let's see how many of you can think like ghosts when your HUD goes dark. She taught for the next hour. No slides. No notes. Just questions and answers. Observations that carried the weight of action. Not a single line bragged. Not a single phrase flexed. And yet every cadet listened like what she said might be the difference between going home or not. As the session ended, Morrison stood and approached. Captain Harper, thank you. I meant what I said the other day. I was wrong. You were learning, she said. That's all any of us ever do. His wingman stepped up beside him. Ma'am, if you're ever flying through our airspace again? She gave a small nod. I fly where the sky takes me. But if we cross paths, you'll know. And with that, she stepped past them. One more instructor walking through the hallway. But behind her, every cadet remained still. Because they didn't just hear a lesson. They met one. The sun sank low behind the far hills, casting long amber streaks across the tarmac. Lena stood beside her L-39 helmet tucked under one arm, flight bag resting on the wing root. Her shadow stretched over the cracked concrete, parallel to the aircraft she'd spent years rebuilding. She watched the sky above like someone looking into memory, not distance. Rows of modern jets shimmered in the dying light. F-22s, F-35s, even a couple of T-38s lined neatly, waiting for morning sorties. Their fuselages gleamed in polished grays, sharp and angular like the future, but it was her aircraft that drew the evening light in a softer way, worn but still ready, out of time, but not out of place. The tower had cleared her for departure 20 minutes ago. No rush, no pressure. She moved slowly through her pre-flight checks, touching each panel and switch as if reminding the jet and herself that they still belonged to each other. This wasn't about destinations. This was about continuing. She paused by the intake, watching the last arc of sunlight crest the hangars. The sky looked gentle now, with no threat behind it. She knew better. Of course. The sky never promised safety, but it offered space. That had always been enough. The hum of engines broke the quiet, distant at first, then closer. She turned slowly. 3 F-22s rolled out from the far taxiway. No ground crew, no fanfare, just pilots in helmets, visors down, each jet sliding into motion without the formality of formation. They didn't call her on the radio. They didn't signal with lights. They didn't need to. Behind them, one F-16 followed, its intake whining in that high, familiar pitch she could still recognize by sound alone. It took position off her right wing as if it had always belonged there. She watched for a long second, then smiled, quiet, grateful. She climbed into the L-39 with ease, canopy closing down with a satisfying seal. Systems came alive. Her hands moved through the startup sequence like muscle memory. The little trainer coughed once, then steadied into a confident hum. She brought the throttle forward and rolled into motion. As she turned onto the taxi line, the fighters aligned in loose trail. No comms, no clearance needed beyond understanding. They knew the pace she would set. They matched it without speaking. At the runway hold line, she paused. The tower cleared her again, this time with a note of warmth. Falcon Ghost. Runway 28 left is yours. Smooth skies. She rolled forward without reply. Lifting into the air, the L-39 climbed clean, simple, light. Within moments, the F-22s rose alongside her, two flanking low, one tucked in high. The F-16 slid in close behind, filling the open space like it had waited years to belong there again. They didn't form a parade. It wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't official. But it was right. At 12,000 feet. Lena looked out across the fading light and saw it as it truly was, not an ending, not a farewell. Just one more flight with company that finally understood. They didn't escort her because they had to. They came because they wanted to remember what flying meant when everything else fell away. And up there, with the horizon burning red and gold, old and new flew together not in ceremony, but in silence. A shared sky, a shared purpose. Legacy doesn't ask to be seen. It shows up, flies beside you, and says nothing. Just stays. The auditorium was quiet as Lena Harper stood at the podium, the blue and silver of the Air Force Academy crest behind her. It had been 6 months since the skies above New Mexico, since the escort that became a tribute. Now she stood before cadets about to earn their wings. Every face sharp with ambition. Every uniform pressed to perfection. She looked at them with calm eyes, taking in the room. No notes, no script, just presence. "You've all earned your call signs," she began. "Some are funny, some are forgettable, a few will stick. But the ones that matter, you don't choose them. They're given, not by rank, not by hours logged, but by what others see when you're at your most real." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word landed with clarity. The real test isn't your first solo flight, or your first night landing in weather. It's what you do when the mission changes mid-air, when your HUD goes black and you're the only thing between someone and the worst day of their life. A hand rose in the back row, a cadet with keen eyes and a nervous jawline. "Ma'am, with AI drones, predictive targeting, automated response, do call signs even matter anymore?" Lena nodded slowly. "Good question. But let me ask you this. When a machine fails, who picks up the mission? When the plan falls apart, who thinks without panic? The system doesn't have courage. The algorithm doesn't feel fear or take responsibility." She let that sink in. You're not here to be better than machines. You're here to be human where no machine can be. That's what lasts. That's what we follow. She paused, her eyes moving across the crowd. Some leaned forward now. Some just sat still, the weight of it settling on them in quiet understanding. A real call sign doesn't say you flew well. It says you flew when it counted. And someone saw it. The ceremony ended without applause. It wasn't that kind of speech. It was the kind that followed people out of the room and into the sky. Lena walked alone to the flight line afterward. Her L-39 waited near the edge of the ramp, parked away from the sleek T-6s and clean-cut F-35 trainers. No one followed her. No send-off. Just the quiet hum of ground crews resetting for the next cycle. She strapped in slowly. The canopy closed with a familiar hiss. As the engine spun up, the horizon flared gold through the last clouds of the afternoon. She lifted off at 1742. No fanfare. No formation. And far above, somewhere just out of reach, the sky waited. Legends don't end with ceremonies. They don't retire. They return to where they belong, not to be seen, but to remind others that flying is more than motion. It's memory. It's judgment. It's heart. And so, she flew